The calm of the colony planet Regalia 7 was shattered by a deafening explosion. Leela Kane, a young girl of 16, was walking home from school. She hummed softly to herself, her mind on the homework she had left undone. She had no idea that in the shadows above, a monstrous alien ship was silently descending, invisible to the naked eye thanks to its advanced cloaking technology. The ship's engine thrummed quietly as it hovered just above the ground. Suddenly, the earth beneath her feet shook violently. Before Leela could react, a beam of blue light shot from the underside of the ship, creating a shockwave that threw her to the ground. Her vision blurred as she struggled to get up. She looked around in confusion, trying to process what had just happened. The sound of metal scraping against stone filled the air as the ship's landing gear touched down. Leela's heart raced as she scrambled to her feet, but she was too slow. A set of mechanical arms shot out from the ship, grabbing her before she could flee. The cold, unfeeling grip of the alien technology tightened around her waist, and she was lifted off the ground. Her feet dangled helplessly in the air as the ship's doors opened wide, revealing a group of alien soldiers in dark armor, their eyes glowing with a cruel red hue. "Help! Somebody, please!" Leela screamed, her voice barely reaching anyone. The streets were empty, and no one could hear her. Panic gripped her as she struggled, but the more she fought, the tighter the metal claws around her body became. Her breath came in short, terrified gasps as the soldiers dragged her into the ship's hold. The door slammed shut behind her with a resounding thud, sealing her fate. Back on the surface, the people of Regalia 7 had no idea what was happening. The ship's cloaking device rendered it invisible to the colony sensors. In mere moments, Leela was gone. Meanwhile, deep in space, Ezekiel Reaper Kane, known across the galaxy as one of the deadliest humans to ever live, was sitting alone in his starship. He was no longer part of the galactic military, but his reputation was enough to ensure that everyone knew his name. A quiet man with a violent past, Ezekiel had spent years hunting down the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. The blood of countless warlords and mercenaries stained his hands, but nothing mattered to him more than one thing: his daughter, Leela. Ezekiel's ship, the Vengeance, floated silently in deep space, its cloaking field activated. He wasn't on any mission at the moment, just drifting, lost in thought. That was until the communication system buzzed. A message flickered onto the screen. The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical, and the words struck like a blade to the chest. "Your daughter is now in our hands, Kane. If you want to see her alive again, come to Zerath 9. Do not make this difficult." The transmission cut off before Ezekiel could respond. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, the weight of the message sinking in. Then, without warning, the calm demeanor that had kept him alive for years shattered. Ezekiel's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breath was slow, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. He leaned forward, and his fingers danced across the control panel. His ship's systems hummed to life as he prepared for what was to come. He didn't need to think twice. The galaxy had just made the biggest mistake of its life. Ezekiel wasn't the kind of man you abducted anyone in his family from. He was the kind of man who would burn the galaxy to find his daughter. Activate cloaking. Set course for Zerath 9. And if anyone stands in my way, they will die. The ship's engines powered up with a quiet roar as the Vengeance shifted into hyperdrive. Ezekiel didn't care that Zerath 9 was known as one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. He didn't care that it was ruled by mercenaries and warlords who would kill him on sight. He didn't care about anything except getting his daughter back, and he would do whatever it took to make sure she was safe again. Back on Regalia 7, Leela was now aboard the alien ship, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Her mind raced as she looked around the dark, cold interior of the vessel. Alien voices echoed through the walls, too alien for her to understand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she was tossed into a dark holding cell. The door slammed shut behind her with a hiss, trapping her inside. She sank to her knees, her breath heavy, but her mind was already working. She had grown up with stories of her father's fearsome reputation. She had heard of his battles and the wars he fought, how he was known to be the deadliest human alive. She had never seen him in action, but she knew the stories well. She only had one thought running through her mind now. My father is coming for me. The ship continued its silent journey, cutting through space like a shadow. The atmosphere inside the cockpit grew tense as the Vengeance neared Zeroth 9. The plan was to make a quick entry, land in a remote location, and then proceed with caution. Ezekiel knew the planet was crawling with Syndicate soldiers, but he didn't care. They had made the mistake of taking his daughter, and now they would pay the price. The sensors detected Zeroth 9's atmosphere, thick with dust and storms. The planet was as unforgiving as its reputation. Ezekiel engaged the ship's stealth mode, making it nearly invisible to the planet's radar systems. He would have to be fast, precise, and above all, unpredictable. The landing zone he had chosen was a barren wasteland on the outskirts of a heavily guarded Syndicate stronghold. Ezekiel activated the holographic camouflage on the ship, making it blend into the rocky terrain. It was a small trick, but it would give him the element of surprise. As he touched down, Ezekiel's muscles tensed. The ground beneath the ship rumbled, but the Vengeance landed smoothly, almost silently. He switched off the engines and pulled his weapons from their holsters. His heart beat steady, calm before the storm. The moment had arrived. "Aegis, stand by," Ezekiel said, his voice low but clear. "I'll need you to hack into their systems and give me a map of the compound. They won't know what hit them." Aegis's voice came through the comms. "Understood. Hacking into Syndicate security now." Ezekiel didn't wait. He moved swiftly, checking the loadout of his weapons. His trusty energy rifle was secured, along with a set of EMP grenades to disable the enemy's technology. There was no room for error. His eyes locked onto the distant silhouette of the Syndicate fortress. It was just a few miles away. He would have to cover the distance on foot. He slipped out of the ship, his boots crunching against the dry earth beneath him. The landscape of Zeroth 9 was desolate, barren, rocky, and devoid of life. The distant sound of machinery hummed through the air, the only sign that he wasn't alone. His training took over as he moved through the terrain, his senses alert to every shift in the wind, every sound that didn't belong. Aegis's voice crackled in his ear. "I've found their security systems. I'm sending you the coordinates now." Ezekiel nodded to himself and adjusted his course. He could feel the presence of the Syndicate soldiers closing in, but he didn't slow down. His mind was already thinking 2 steps ahead. They wouldn't be ready for him. They never were. As he approached the fortress, he saw the guards on patrol. They were heavily armed, but he was faster, quieter. He moved through the shadows, taking out each guard with lethal precision. The first one didn't even know what hit him. The second guard was barely able to raise his weapon before Ezekiel's rifle fired, silencing him forever. Ezekiel wasn't here for a fight. He was here for his daughter. He could hear the faintest sound of voices ahead, voices that made his heart race. Lila was close. He pressed forward, his resolve unshaken. He could feel it now, her presence, the reason he had come all this way. No matter what it took, he was going to bring her back. The hunt had only just begun. The galaxy was in turmoil. The Galactic Council had been watching, waiting, and warning the different factions about the rise of human power. But it seemed that no one was really listening. The alien races were too busy fighting amongst themselves, too busy underestimating humanity. They didn't understand that the humans, despite their relatively young presence in the galaxy, had something that none of them had: determination. And now, that very determination was about to shake the foundations of the galaxy. The council chambers were a grand sight, filled with beings from all corners of the galaxy. Representatives from countless worlds stood around a holographic table, their expressions ranging from concern to disbelief. At the center, the Supreme Counselor, an imposing figure with skin that shimmered like starlight, looked down on the assembly. He was flanked by his aides, each one a powerful figure in their own right, but none dared speak out of turn. The council had heard the reports, and now they were about to discuss the one thing that worried them more than any other: humans. "Counselor, we've been monitoring human activity for years now," said one of the representatives, a tall alien with bright orange skin and a sharp, angular face. "Their technology is advancing faster than we ever anticipated. Their weapons are almost as powerful as our own, and their tactics are." The Supreme Counselor raised a hand, silencing the room. His deep, rumbling voice echoed throughout the chamber as he addressed them all. "The problem isn't just their technology. The problem is their resolve. The humans have something that no other race has, a fire within them that refuses to be extinguished. And that fire has started to spread." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. A murmur spread through the room as the council members exchanged uneasy glances. It was true. The humans had risen to power quickly, establishing themselves as formidable warriors in the galaxy. What worried the council most was how unpredictable they were. Humans didn't think like the other races. Their willingness to take risks and fight for their survival made them a unique force, one that no one could easily control. "The humans are unpredictable," said another council member, a reptilian being with scales that gleamed under the soft lights of the chamber. "They have no allegiance to anyone but themselves. This makes them dangerous. But it also makes them free," the Supreme Counselor replied, his voice softening. "Freedom is a weapon in itself. The other races are bound by tradition, politics, and history. But the humans—" A loud bang echoed through the chamber, cutting the counselor off. The doors to the room slammed open, and a human soldier stepped inside, his armor gleaming under the harsh lights. The soldier's expression was stern, his eyes full of determination, but there was also a sadness behind them, a weight that came with knowing what was at stake. "Counselor, I have a message for you," the soldier said, his voice steady. He held up a data pad and slammed it onto the table in front of the Supreme Counselor. "You should have listened when the humans warned you." The entire room fell silent. The soldier didn't wait for a response. Instead, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the long hallways of the council building. The Supreme Counselor picked up the data pad and activated it. On the screen, a message appeared, flashing in bold letters. "The humans have found your weakness." The Supreme Counselor's face turned dark as he read the message. The other council members leaned forward, eager to understand what it meant. The words seemed almost like a threat, but no one had expected the humans to be so brazen. To threaten the Galactic Council? It was madness. "What do we do now?" asked the orange-skinned representative, his voice trembling. "The humans are no longer just a minor threat. If they truly understand how to exploit our weaknesses, we'll deal with it," the Supreme Counselor said coldly, his voice dripping with authority. "The humans think they can challenge us. They'll learn what happens when they take on the Galactic Council." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. The humans had always been underestimated, dismissed as nothing more than a nuisance. But now, with their growing strength, they were beginning to stand tall in the galaxy. And that was something no one had prepared for. The message didn't end there. As the Supreme Counselor continued to read, he saw something that made his stomach churn. A map highlighting a remote section of the galaxy that the Council had long kept hidden. Its location was known only to a select few. The map showed something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up: the human fleet. They had gathered in a sector of space that the Council had considered unimportant, but now the humans were using it to their advantage. "How did they find this place?" one of the Council members asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "I don't know," the Supreme Counselor replied, his voice grim. "But it seems the humans have spies everywhere. Their intelligence network is more sophisticated than we gave them credit for." The tension in the room grew palpable. There was a sense of urgency now. a sense that the Council had underestimated the humans in ways they couldn't afford to anymore. The time for warnings was over. The humans had already taken action, and now the Council had to decide how to respond. The room was silent for a long moment, each council member lost in their own thoughts. Finally, the Supreme Counselor spoke again, his voice cold and commanding. "Prepare the fleet. We will show the humans what happens when they challenge us." But in the back of his mind, a nagging thought lingered. Could the humans truly defeat them? Could they really be the ones to bring down the mighty Galactic Council? No one could answer that question yet, but one thing was certain: the galaxy was about to change, and it would never be the same again. The planet Zerath-9 was a desolate place, surrounded by a thick layer of purple clouds that blocked out the sun. Its surface was rocky, with jagged mountains and vast stretches of barren land. This world had been untouched for centuries, a forgotten outpost in the galaxy. But now, it was about to become the most important battleground in the history of the galaxy. The humans had chosen Zerath-9 as their staging ground for a final strike against the Galactic Council. It was a planet the Council had long ignored, seeing it as unimportant, but the humans saw an opportunity. It was strategically located in a remote corner of space, perfect for setting up a surprise assault. The Council, confident in their superiority, had no idea what was coming for them. As the first wave of the Galactic Council's fleet arrived above Zerath-9, they were unaware that the human fleet had already established a stronghold on the planet's surface. The humans had hidden their ships in the planet's shadow, using advanced cloaking technology to remain undetected. But that was about to change. High above the planet, the battle began. The Council's warships were massive, their sleek, silver bodies glinting in the light of the distant stars. They moved like a deadly swarm, each ship programmed to perfection, their weapons aimed and ready to fire. Their AI systems worked in perfect harmony, each ship a perfect extension of the collective will of the Galactic Council. But the humans weren't intimidated. They had come prepared. As the first shots rang out from the Council ships, the human fleet retaliated with speed and precision. Their ships darted in and out of the battle, cloaking and decloaking at lightning speeds, catching the Council off guard. It was a chaos of flashing lights, explosions, and the sound of weapons firing through the void. The Council ships were powerful, but they lacked the flexibility and unpredictability of the human fleet. While the Council relied on their superior technology and AI systems, the humans fought with an intensity that the AI couldn't replicate. In the heart of the battle, Captain Jonas, king of the human fleet, led his squadron with unwavering determination. He had seen many battles in his time, but nothing like this. The stakes were higher than ever, and the weight of his mission was clear. Zerath-9 was not just a planet. It was the symbol of human resistance, a statement to the entire galaxy that humans would not be cowed by the Council's power. "Captain, enemy ships are closing in from the east," came the voice of his communications officer, Lieutenant Harper. "We need to pull back, or we'll be surrounded." King's jaw clenched. He knew they couldn't afford to retreat. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. "Keep pushing forward. We've trained for this. Trust the technology and trust each other. The Council doesn't know what's coming." He gave the signal, and his squadron engaged in a daring maneuver. They broke through the Council's outer defenses, a series of precise, calculated moves that took full advantage of the human fleet's agility. Kane's ship, the Vanguard, weaved in and out of enemy fire, its advanced cloaking technology allowing it to avoid the worst of the barrage. Meanwhile, on the surface of Zerath-9, the ground battle was heating up. Human soldiers, equipped with cutting-edge armor and weapons, stormed the planet's surface, engaging the Council's ground forces. The battle was fierce, close-quarters combat that tested the soldiers' endurance and resolve. The human soldiers had trained for years to fight in conditions like this. They knew how to adapt, how to overcome the odds. As they advanced through the desolate terrain, they fought with everything they had. Every step forward was hard-won, but their determination never wavered. In the midst of the chaos, Sergeant Bonner, a veteran of countless battles, fought with a fury that only a soldier who had seen his friends fall could understand. His unit had been tasked with capturing a key council communications hub, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in their way. As he led his team through the battlefield, he could hear the whizzing of plasma bolts flying past him, the explosions shaking the ground beneath his boots. "Move up, keep pushing forward," Bonner shouted, his voice barely audible over the sounds of war. His team followed his lead, charging forward with renewed resolve. They were close now, so close to victory. But even as the humans pressed their advantage, the Galactic Council was not without its own tricks. The Council had unleashed a new weapon, a massive war machine that shook the ground as it marched forward, its hulking frame casting a long shadow over the battlefield. The machine was a testament to the Council's power, a towering behemoth of metal and firepower, with enough destructive force to level entire cities in a single blow. Bonner's heart sank when he saw it. He knew this was the turning point. The Council was desperate, but they were far from defeated. This war machine was a game-changer, and the humans had no choice but to find a way to neutralize it. "Focus fire on that machine," Bonner barked, rallying his troops. "We can't let it reach the base. Everyone, aim for the weak points." The soldiers raised their weapons and fired, sending a barrage of plasma bolts toward the massive machine. But the armor was too thick. Their shots bounced off, leaving little more than scorch marks on its surface. The war machine advanced relentlessly, crushing everything in its path. Bonner knew they needed something more, something to turn the tide. As the war machine closed in on their position, he made a decision. "I'm going in," he said, his voice steady but determined. "Cover me." With that, Bonner charged forward, running directly toward the behemoth. His soldiers looked on in disbelief, unsure of what he was planning. But they didn't have time to question him. They opened fire to provide cover as Bonner sprinted toward the war machine's underbelly. He reached it just as the machine raised its massive cannon, ready to fire. With a desperate leap, Bonner slid under the machine and planted explosives on its vulnerable underside. The seconds felt like hours as he activated the charges and rolled to safety. Then, with a deafening explosion, the war machine erupted in a ball of fire and debris. The shockwave knocked Bonner off his feet, but he managed to push through the pain. The battlefield had just shifted, and for the first time in hours, the humans had the upper hand. As the Council's forces reeled from the loss of their war machine, the human soldiers pressed forward, determined to finish what they had started. The battle for Zeroth 9 was far from over, but the humans were proving something important. They would not give up. Not now, not ever. In the sky above, the human fleet continued to fight fiercely. Captain Kane's ship, the Vanguard, led the charge against the remaining Council warships, weaving through fire and debris with relentless precision. The humans had proven that they could stand toe-to-toe with the might of the Galactic Council, and they weren't about to stop now. Zeroth 9 was just the beginning. The galaxy would remember this battle for generations to come. The battle for Zeroth 9 had raged for days, leaving the planet scared and battered. The ground trembled beneath the constant explosions, and the sky was filled with the streaks of plasma bolts. Human forces had made significant progress, but they were facing one final obstacle. The Syndicate leader, the shadowy figure who had been manipulating events from behind the scenes. The Syndicate, a group of mercenaries, criminals, and rogue organizations, had allied with the Galactic Council in exchange for power and resources. The leader of this syndicate was a ruthless individual, known only as Vrex. Vrex was a towering figure, with a metallic arm that gleamed under the harsh light of the planet. His face was concealed behind a high-tech visor, and his voice had an unnatural mechanical quality. He had built a reputation for crushing those who dared oppose him, and now he was determined to end the human resistance once and for all. Captain Jonas King and his squadron had just received intel that Vrex was hiding in an underground facility deep within Zeroth 9's ravaged city. The humans had successfully captured several key strategic points on the planet, but the Syndicate's stronghold remained untouched. King knew that Vrex was the key to the Council's final push, and taking him down would be the decisive blow in the battle for the galaxy's future. As the team descended into the depths of the ruined city, they could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on them. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant echoes of gunfire and the whirring of their cloaking devices. The human soldiers, heavily armed and ready for whatever came next, moved swiftly through the darkened alleys and abandoned buildings. "We've got to be close," Lieutenant Harper whispered, her voice crackling through the comms. "Intel says the facility is up ahead." King nodded, his hand gripping the hilt of his plasma blade. His heart was pounding, but his mind remained sharp. He had faced countless enemies in his career, but there was something different about Vrex. The Syndicate leader wasn't just a powerful figure. He was a symbol of everything the humans had fought against. If they could defeat him here, they would send a message to the galaxy that no one, not even the Syndicate, could stand against them. As they approached the entrance to the underground facility, the tension was palpable. The air felt thick, charged with the anticipation of the confrontation that was about to unfold. The door to the facility was heavily fortified, but the human team had brought the necessary tools to break through. Sergeant Bonner, his face grim, placed explosives on the door, stepping back just in time to avoid the blast. With a deafening roar, the door exploded inward, revealing a long hallway leading deep into the facility. The walls were covered with strange, glowing symbols, a reminder of the Syndicate's connection to the darker corners of the galaxy. The human soldiers moved cautiously, their weapons raised, as they ventured deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The hallway opened into a massive chamber, where Vrex stood at the far end, surrounded by his personal guards. He was tall, imposing, and exuded an air of cold, calculating menace. His glowing visor seemed to fixate on King, as if he had been expecting them all along. "So the humans finally made it this far," Vrex's voice echoed through the room, robotic and mechanical. "I must admit, I'm impressed. But this is where your journey ends." Captain King didn't flinch. He had seen enough to know that the Syndicate leader wasn't just a figurehead. He was a warrior in his own right, a deadly opponent who wouldn't go down easily. But King had something Vrex didn't: the heart and determination of humanity. "We didn't come this far just to lose," King said, his voice steady and defiant. "Your reign ends today, Vrex." The room was tense, the silence broken only by the sound of the soldiers adjusting their weapons. Vrex raised his hand, and the guards around him stepped forward, each one armed with advanced energy rifles. It was clear they weren't going to make this easy. "Kill them," Vrex commanded, his voice cold and emotionless. The human soldiers moved quickly, their faces set with determination. They had just emerged victorious, but the war wasn't over. The rescue was the final chapter in a long, painful journey. Jonas's mind was laser-focused on one thing: Riley. He couldn't lose her again. The journey to Zephora was tense. The moon they were headed to was surrounded by a thick layer of fog and uncharted asteroid fields. It was the perfect place to hide a captive. But Jonas wasn't afraid. He had been through far worse. His soldiers were prepared, and they would do whatever it took to get Riley back. The squadron arrived in orbit around Zephora's moon, cloaking their ship as they entered the atmosphere. They knew the Syndicate's allies, including the Galactic Council, had powerful defenses, but they had a secret weapon: their human ingenuity. The ship's cloaking technology allowed them to slip through the radar undetected, but it wouldn't last long. They had to be swift. Jonas's eyes narrowed as they descended into the dense atmosphere of the moon. Below them, they could see the sprawling facility, heavily guarded with security towers and automated defense systems. This wasn't going to be easy, but Jonas wasn't worried. He had faced impossible odds before, and he knew that humanity always found a way to overcome. They landed just outside the compound's perimeter, and the squad disembarked. moving silently through the darkened terrain. The moon's surface was barren, rocky, and desolate, but they knew the real danger was inside the compound. "Stay sharp," Jonas ordered. "We move fast. We get in, we get her, and we get out." The team nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. The air was thick with tension, and every step they took was calculated. They could hear the faint hum of the compound's defenses, and the flicker of distant lights illuminated the horizon. They were close. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the outer walls of the facility. The security measures were intense, but the humans had come prepared. Sergeant Bonner, the team's explosives expert, placed charges on the perimeter fence, silently detonating them and creating a hole large enough for them to slip through. As they infiltrated the compound, they moved swiftly, using their cloaking technology to remain undetected. Every corner, every door, every shadow was a potential threat. The tension was unbearable, but Jonas kept his focus. They had one goal in mind: Riley. They reached the inner chamber where she was being held. The room was cold and sterile, the walls lined with advanced technology. Riley was lying unconscious on a bed, her face pale but peaceful. Jonas's heart skipped a beat at the sight of her. She was alive. That was all that mattered. But just as Jonas reached out to her, a loud voice echoed through the chamber. "You think you can just walk in here and take her?" Jonas spun around, his pulse quickening. Standing in the doorway was the council's leader, a cold, calculating figure who had orchestrated the kidnapping of his daughter. The man's face was a mask of disdain, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You won't get away with this," Jonas growled, his voice filled with a fury that burned like fire. The council leader laughed, the sound hollow and devoid of humanity. "You're too late. This was never about your daughter. She was just the bait. And now you've walked right into my trap." Jonas didn't flinch. He was used to these games. He had seen betrayal, deception, and manipulation in every corner of the galaxy. But there was one thing the council leader hadn't accounted for: the heart of a father. With a swift motion, Jonas activated his plasma blade, and the battle began. Sparks flew as the two men clashed, the air crackling with energy. The council leader was powerful, but Jonas's rage and determination were unmatched. This was no longer about victory. This was personal. This was about protecting his daughter, no matter the cost. In the chaos, Jonas struck with precision, knocking the weapon from the council leader's hand and sending him sprawling to the floor. Without hesitation, Jonas approached Riley's bed, gently lifting her into his arms. "I promised you I would never leave you," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "And I'm keeping that promise, no matter what." With Riley in his arms, Jonas turned to his team. The mission was complete. The human resistance had triumphed once again. And no matter the cost, Jonas King had fulfilled the promise that mattered most: to bring his daughter home.